Proceedings are resumed. Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? If no other member wish to speak, does the mover of the bill wish to exercise his right of reply?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can truly tell you this afternoon, I don't know where to start. Sorry to disappoint you with that. No. Mr. Speaker, I want to with your permission, use a quick analogy which at first glance might appear to be irrelevant, but you've known me long enough, sir, to know, as I give you every assurance, I will show the relevance.
So ordered.
If you would allow me. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, many years ago, agriculture in Cayman struggled for long periods of time. When the supermarket chains really got themselves established, one of the first complaints that I continually heard as the Minister of Agriculture, and that's many, many years ago now, was from the farming community. And they said, the supermarkets will not buy our stuff. I kept saying to myself, why? And then the next thing, I was approached, I mean in a very serious manner, and to what they thought a justified manner, by that same farming community. And their attempt was to put pressure for the government to apply tariffs, even if they were seasonal tariffs, on certain fruits and vegetables which had to be imported. Their idea was, if you put these tariffs on and make the price exorbitant for the importer, that is the supermarkets, or even the wholesalers, then they'll buy our product, which is a local product. So I thought about it, and I heard a little while ago the fifth elected member for Georgetown speaking about that gut instinct. I just want him to know that I too have those gut instincts at times. The only thing I can say to him is that my instincts have to be bigger than his for obvious reasons. That was said in jest. But Mr. Speaker, I decided, you know what? Let's get everybody together, because there has to be a reason for all of this happening. Because every time I spoke to the supermarket proprietors, they said, we'd love to buy this stuff, but we can't get it all the time, which I knew. So here's what we arrived at. The farmers, by and large, not nowadays, I'm talking then, they expected to get up in the morning, either to have harvested the day before or to harvest early that morning and drive up to the back of the supermarkets and say, here's my stuff, here's how much I want for it, buy it. Of course, we realize very swiftly it doesn't work like that, because the supermarkets have to place their orders weeks and weeks in advance for delivery. And if they have something on the way or something just arrived and you bring the same product and they have theirs that they have imported, they can't do anything else with it. They have to sell that. So they're going to sell what they have first before they buy from you. So they got that. The second thing was, you can't just tell me what you think should be the price for it. It is something we have to sit down and negotiate. And it is something that we have to work out, compared, because you certainly don't have the volume for me, me meaning the supermarket, not to have to import that product. So that means I have to have your product on the shelf and my product on the shelf at the same time, mine meaning the imported one. So we have to get somewhere where it's not too much distance between the price, otherwise your stuff is not going to sell. I will pay you for it and it's going to stay there and spoil. Okay? And then the other question which came to mind from the supermarkets was, guys, you need to ensure that the quality of your product is right. Because if our imported product is a much better quality than your product, regardless of whether your product is local, organic, or whatever else, or whatever other terminology, they're going to buy the imported product. Mr. Speaker, today, we are not producing enough of all of those products to satisfy the demand in the supermarkets and at the farmers' market. I do believe, sir, but I will go on to explain, that you already see the relevance of the analogy. So, Mr. Speaker, again, the Honorable Leader of the Opposition has been here longer than you and I. But after him comes you and I in time spent here. Just shy of 24 and a half years, I believe. And Mr. Speaker, I know that your memory will tell you that the same arguments that we heard this afternoon, which are all valid arguments from that side, you have heard uttered from my lips, not only when I was on that side, but whenever I have been on this side. So it's nothing new, is all I'm saying, to me. It's all valid. My point is, so that we can get it all crystal clear, I am in total agreement with everybody that has spoken this afternoon regarding the oil companies. Meaning, I try to be cordial, but I want the whole world to understand this. I have no thought in my mind that at some points in time, they charge too much for the fuel they sell. Notice I said at some points in time. I would not go as far right now to say every day of the week, 24/7 all day long, because I don't have the evidence yet. Mr. Speaker, I said what I said about being here for the length of time that I've been and speaking about this issue for so long because, Mr. Speaker, while this bill may not be perfect, you have no idea how satisfied I am in my mind that before I have left these hallowed halls, I brought this bill, because nothing existed before. Nothing, nada. So even I if I so desired, could go through this bill and tell you what it may not achieve. And I accept that. But I can go through this bill and tell you of the many things that it will achieve which did not exist before. So it has to be good. If I were on the other side this afternoon, my theme would be the same thing. The bill is all right, but it doesn't go far enough. It doesn't have enough teeth. That's what I'd be saying too. And I would conveniently not remember the utility, regulation, and competition law, which I brought a few months back, which speaks to the majority of things that we talk about with a lack of teeth. But let me, before I deal with that, Mr. Speaker, say to this Honorable House and everyone else that this has been a long enough journey. It has not been riddled with problems. But every day, and I'm sure that will include tomorrow, something else will stare us in the face with regards to this entire sector that nobody thought of the day before.
May I call on the Deputy Premier for the suspension of Standing Order 10-2?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move the suspension of Standing Order 10-2, that the House can work past the hour of interruption.
The question is that Standing Order 10-2 be suspended to enable the business of the House to continue beyond the hour of 4:30 p.m. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, no. The ayes have it. The House will continue beyond 4:30 p.m. Mr. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So as I was saying, I am sure that in the not too distant future, once we're up and running and everything is churning on a daily basis, we will find changes which can improve what obtains at that point in time. And Mr. Speaker, we need to appreciate that the purpose of primary legislation, which is what we call a law, is usually to set out and lay the framework under which we operate in whatever that law is all about. And on most occasions, as with this occasion, the regulations will be the nuts and bolts which operates the engine of the framework, which is the law. Where we say the devil is in the details, the devil will be in those details, which is the regulations. And that's the reason why we speak to laws and we speak to regulations. Some members have been calling for some specific items. And I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, not making any excuses, but saying that the board of directors of ORCO will make recommendations to the ministry, who will then pass that on to the cabinet with regards to these regulations as to exactly how they will work. And it couldn't be done simply from a timeline before now. Otherwise, this legislation would not be here, and I certainly didn't want that to happen. Besides that, Mr. Speaker, I just want to draw members' attention to the Utilities Regulation and Competition Law of 2016, which we passed in November of 2016. That law, as I said then, is the overarching piece of legislation which will have under its wings the economic regulation of the water sector and the wastewater sector, the ICTA, the ERA, and the fuel sector. This is the last piece of the puzzle, the bill to which I speak right now. In that law, Mr. Speaker, Section 44, and I wish to crave your indulgence for you to allow me to read 2 full sections, if I could, with your permission.
Please proceed.
Part 7 of the ERCO law speaks to significant market power. 44, Section 44 reads, the office may at any time determine that a sectoral provider has significant market power in a relevant market. The office shall establish and publish criteria relating to the definition of relevant markets in the respective sectors, and against which market power may be assessed for the purpose of making a determination under subsection 1. The office's criteria referred to in subsection 2 shall include references to the sectoral power's market share, the sectoral provider's ability to influence market conditions, the sectoral provider's access to financial resources, the sectoral provider's experience in providing products to the market, and any other criteria considered relevant by the office. Without prejudice to subsection 1, sectoral providers shall be deemed to have significant market power in determination of utility services on their own networks unless the office determines otherwise. As I continue to read, Mr. Speaker, I want to make sure everybody understands that these sections are not limited to ICTA, ERA, the fuel sector, economic regulation of water, or any other sector. It includes all that are under the umbrella of this law. The office may impose specific conditions on sectoral providers determined to have significant market power in the relevant markets, including obligations relating to, and here's where you need to pay attention. I don't mean you, Mr. Speaker. Including obligations relating to cost recovery and price controls, including obligations for cost orientation of prices and obligations concerning cost accounting systems, the publication of a reference offer ensuring equivalence of access or interconnection to any of those services or facilities in which the sectoral provider has significant market power at tariffs based on an efficient sectoral provider's costs. Going on, prior to imposing any obligations under subsection 1, the office shall review the market in which the sectoral provider has significant market power, shall consider the regulatory burden and the benefits to consumers of imposing any such regulation on a sectoral provider, shall ensure that any cost recovery mechanism or pricing methodology that is mandated serves to promote efficiency and sustainable competition and maximize consumer benefits. Shall take into account the investment made by the relevant sectoral provider and allow the sectoral provider a reasonable rate of return on capital efficiently employed, taking into account the risks involved. Shall ensure that where implementation of a cost accounting system is mandated in order to support price controls, a determination of the cost accounting system is made publicly available, showing at least the main categories under which costs are grouped and the rules used for the allocation of costs, and may also take account of prices available in comparable markets. And Mr. Speaker, where a significant market power sectoral provider is made subject to an obligation regarding the cost orientation of its prices, the burden of proof that charges are derived from costs including a reasonable rate of return on capital efficiently employed shall lie with the significant market power sector provider concerned. For the purpose of calculating the cost of efficient services, the office may direct the significant market power sectoral provider to employ specific cost accounting methods. I'm going to repeat that. To employ specific cost accounting methods, or the office may use cost accounting methods independent of those used by the relevant sectoral provider. The office may require the significant market power sectoral provider to provide full justification for its prices and may, where appropriate, require prices to be adjusted. So, Mr. Speaker, just to say to you that the Fuel Markets Regulation Bill comes under the ERCO law. Those sections that I just read are what will give the Board of Directors of ERCO the authority to do all the things that we're talking about. Mr. Speaker, while the argument has been put forward that this law should include all of the specific details, I hope that I'm not saying this wrong, but I believe everybody understands how it has to be done. And I know that everybody is anxious. And I know that people have to be seen to be defending the right causes, and I respect all of that. But I want everybody to know that I hold myself out to be defending those right causes too. So I am not going to come here without thinking this thing through, bringing some little, as the Honorable Leader of the Opposition would say, some little fia thing, just to make it look half decent. That is not the case, sir. What we need to understand is the big picture concept. Mr. Speaker, mention was made of the National Energy Policy, which was tabled just a few short days ago. We will now have the Utilities Regulation and Competition Office up and running. We will have all the necessary legislation in place, by no means not perfect, or not by any means perfect, I should say. I accept that. But we will have the framework under which OFREG can operate and its board of directors can begin to function the way it should be functioning. And all of those other things, Mr. Speaker, will be under their ambit. You see, what used to fool us was thinking of all of these things, and we would keep trying to figure how to deal with all of them. And Mr. Speaker, I believe that we figured it out. But it's still new. So we can't expect the results that we should have a year from now or even 6 months from now to be here today, is all I'm saying. And Mr. Speaker, I'm proud that we got this far, because regardless of what is not exactly right today can easily be fixed, because we have something that can be fixed. We had nothing before. Absolutely nothing. That's all I'm saying. Mr. Speaker, there have been several points raised which I just want to make short mention of. RCAM. I read that section from the Utility Regulation and Competition Law, which spoke to any methodology that the Board of Directors wishes to employ. That includes RCAM. RCAM is spoken to in the other pieces of legislation, because the Water Authority now operates under a system of RCAM. And it is expected that any other licenses that are granted, that rates will be calculated under some form of the principle known as RCAM. The member from East End, who is with good knowledge of the formula, spoke to that. And quite rightly, he said, it doesn't have to all be the same rate, the same amounts or figures plugged in. That can vary in each circumstance. It's the principle. So I don't wish for him or anyone else to believe that those are things that are chucked aside, not taken into consideration. Absolutely not so. And it is important for OFREG and the Board of Directors to be able to create the nuts and bolts under which any new licensee will be able to charge rates. And that goes across all of the sectors. So that's why one formula can't fit all, but the principles will remain the same. I also noticed the 5th elected member from Georgetown mentioned about somebody dedicated to being able to monitor these prices. I hope no one behind or in front or alongside misunderstands me. But I'm sure that members in this House have heard me speak to a fuel analyst being hired at least 6 months ago, maybe more. Well, I'm happy to say that we're about 2 weeks away from actually getting the person in post. So I think without taking tails out of school, because I don't know who or whatever, but I think, as I understand it, the closing date for applications has passed, and whoever it is that does all of that will go through that, and I am very hopeful that some bright young Caymanian will be able to dig their heels in to doing that role. And just so that we will understand, the fuel analysts and the prices that will be monitored, not just diesel, not just gasoline. There will be other products that individual will be expected to also monitor. If we look, not if, let me say it the other way around. Mr. Speaker, I would not have come this far with this piece of legislation without making the discovery of how it's done in other comparable jurisdictions with regards to how governments deal with the price of fuel. The member from East End alluded to the Bahamian exercise. The fifth elected member from Georgetown spoke to the availability of, he didn't say the Secretariat, but I knew he meant the CARICOM Secretariat with regards to getting information. We've done all of those things. Mr. Speaker, we have used all available information and expertise that we have had access to deal with this entire raft of legislation, of which this very last one is a part. Some of those jurisdictions, especially in the Eastern Caribbean, Mr. Speaker, the government decides what the fuel is sold for. But in several instances, I won't say all of them, but in several instances, the government actually subsidizes the cost of that fuel to be able to guarantee to the consumer what they're going to pay for it. That, I'm just saying to you, it's different strokes for different folks. And there are so many varied ways in which they're dealt with. What we want to be able to do is, while there is the cry, Mr. Speaker, to drop the price control on these people right now. And the member from East End spoke to, he was hoping that nobody thought he was oversimplifying it. I'm not going to say he's oversimplifying it when he says, you get the Platts price, you do this, you figure out the CIF cost, and you do that. I'm not saying no to that. I'm saying that it doesn't end there. That's what I'm saying. Doesn't end there, because it doesn't end there. Because when people come to you and look you in the eye and say that there's a return on investment that is expected, then you have to decide what that is. That's not something that you do what he says and then you figure that out in the same instance. That's all I'm saying. So we have to make sure that what we do is done in a manner that you can, and judicial reviews is the quickest thing you're going to hear about. So we have to make sure we prevent all of that. So the idea was that we have, I hope and trust and pray, because we've done everything we could, that we will have armed the office, OFREG, ERCO, whichever term we want to use, and its board of directors, with a framework for them to make recommendations now, after drawing on more expertise again, to create the regulations and to get up and running as smooth as they can in very short order. They are capable people, and I am looking forward to them being able to function in such a way that we will be proud, because their mandate is two things. Well, not limited to, but the two main components are to encourage competition and consumer protection. That's their mandate. Mr. Speaker, I could speak to other issues, but I believe that I have painted the picture enough, even if it's not perfect in the eyes of many. But I think I've painted a good enough picture for members to understand the objective behind all of this legislation, that there's a big picture approach with the national energy policy, with all of these pieces of legislation, which will decide on how OFREG and its board of directors operate. And Mr. Speaker, let me just say, finally, it is anticipated that when this is up and running, there will be no additional cost to the government from what it was before by each section that was operating, ICTA, ERA, and the rest. So, and water and the fuel sector. So that's a good thing, and certainly I expect much more to be accomplished with its operation. And I want to say that I trust that members will see it fit to support this last link of the chain with regards to legislation. And certainly I commend this legislation to the Honourable House, and I am extremely proud to know that the government could deliver. Thank you.
The question is that a bill shortly entitled the Fuel Market Regulation Bill 2017 be given a second reading. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. The ayes have it. The Fuel Market Regulation Bill 2017 has been given a second reading. Madam Clerk.
The Public Lands Bill 2017.
The bill has been duly moved. Does the mover wish to speak thereto? I call on the Minister for Works to
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sorry for the delay. We're trying to propose a rearrangement of the business to facilitate the most expeditious completion of them. Mr. Speaker, sir, with your permission, I would like to move that items 3 and 4, the Registered Land Amendment Bill 2017 and the Public Authorities Bill 2016. Sorry, sir. Let me start over. Mr. Speaker, with your permission, sir, I would like to move that items 2 and 3, the Public Lands Bill 2017 and the Registered Land Amendment Bill 2017, be demoted in the agenda to fall under item 13, which is the Prescription Amendment Bill 2017. Those really ought to have been grouped together. It is the same minister and they are the same issues that require amendments to the 3 pieces of legislation.
So ordered. The question is that the Public Lands Bill 2017 and the Registered Land Amendment Bill 2017 be moved down to under number 13 on the order paper. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. Motion has carried. Madam Clerk.
The Public Authority Bill 2016.
I now call on the Honorable Deputy Governor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the second reading of a bill shortly entitled the Public Authorities Bill 2016.
The bill has been duly moved. Does the mover wish to speak thereto?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, I rise to introduce the Public Authorities Bill 2016. Mr. Speaker, the bill seeks to establish common best practice standards in governance and human resource practices within our public authorities. Mr. Speaker, public authorities are solely owned by the government. However, compared to the direct relationship between a minister and a government ministry, public authorities often operate with a greater level of separation. It is this separation or independence that creates the need for the robust governance structure that this bill seeks to establish. A robust governance structure will ensure that our public authorities are responsive to policy direction and are accountable for how they use the public resources entrusted to them. It will also introduce new standards and requirements in key areas of human resource management, such as recruitment and salaries, that will curtail the wide variations we often observe among different authorities and in comparison with the civil service. Mr. Speaker, our public authorities play a key role in delivering important economic and societal objectives. Therefore, the public has a right to expect that these functions will be carried out in a manner that is efficient, effective, objective, and transparent. This new bill, this legislation, will provide common standards and requirements that will drive consistent good practice in these important areas. Mr. Speaker, the bill's primary objectives are to improve the governance of public authorities by having a consistent, overarching corporate governance, financial management, and personnel framework, to improve Cabinet's control on how each public authority is operated, to develop sound human resource practice within public authorities, to allow Cabinet to apply strategic policy initiatives to public authorities when it is in the best interest of the public, and, Mr. Speaker, to give ministers more control of the public authorities without impacting on their regulatory function. Mr. Speaker, it should be noted that the need for this legislation is not new. Such legislation was always intended to be part of the original design of the government public sector reform model, which contained three components that were to be supported by three pieces of legislation. Laws were passed to cover the personnel component, namely the Public Service Management Law, and the finance component, namely the Public Finance and Management Law. But legislation was never taken forward for the third component, namely for the governance of our statutory authorities and government-owned companies. Mr. Speaker, the bill itself is not new. The Public Authorities Bill was prepared back in 2006. However, it did not progress at that time, due in large part to a lack of support from our SAGCs. This has left a major gap in our governance framework, and our public authorities have operated without the benefit of overarching legislation to bring consistent standards and expectations. Mr. Speaker, since 2006, reports from the Office of the Auditor General and other developments have identified weaknesses in the governance of our public authorities that explain why this legislation is so urgently needed. For example, Mr. Speaker, in December 2013, the Office of the Auditor General submitted a report entitled "The Accountability of Statutory Authorities and Government Companies." which identified weaknesses in key areas such as clarifying results expectations from our SAGCs, understanding of roles and responsibilities, improving accountability. Mr. Speaker, here it was a few examples of some of the specific weaknesses that was identified by the Auditor General in his reports. It said the accountability framework is not working as well as it should, resulting in little accountability. There is little assurance that SAGCs are operating effectively and achieving the results expected by government. The results expected to be delivered by SAGCs are not clearly stated in the ownership agreements. There is general confusion around the roles and responsibilities within the accountability framework. Ownership agreements are more focused on activities to be delivered rather than the results to be achieved. Objectives not clearly aligned to the objectives of the government. Mr. Speaker, in addition to issues raised by the Office of the Auditor General, there's also been other developments that have been raised. During the austerity period, many of the public authorities did not make the same salary sacrifices as the civil service, namely the 3.2% rollback. There are examples where civil servants moved to public authorities on much higher paying jobs that required less qualification and experience. Salaries in the public authorities have continued to rise, and salaries of senior executives are out of step with similar positions in the civil service. Public authorities were not subject to the policy to curb increases in headcount, which was introduced within the civil service. As a result, the increases in staff in the public authorities were higher than in the civil service. For example, Mr. Speaker, over the 4-year period, 2011 to 2015, staff in the SAGCs grew by 4%, while staff in the civil service reduced by 1.1%. Some of the authorities' CEOs are appointed by cabinet, and according to best practice, they should be appointed by their boards, and of course this can also compromise their independence. Mr. Speaker, this new Public Authorities Bill, when implemented, will provide a means to address the various issues raised by the Auditor General, as well as other key developments and concerns I have identified. Mr. Speaker, there has been extensive consultation with Cabinet, the public authorities, and chief officers on this bill. The majority of the feedback during the consultation stage was received by the public authorities that have regulatory functions, such as those who regulate the financial services, like SEMA, and other authorities like this Civil Aviation Authority. And we thank them for their constructive feedback, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have listened to their concerns, and I want to assure this Honorable House that this bill will not compromise regulatory independence. Good governance and best human resource practices can only enhance our reputation as a jurisdiction internationally. I can also advise this Honorable House that I will be presenting committee stage amendments that will make it clear that this bill will not affect the principal functions of any public authority or their independent regulatory decision-making process. Mr. Speaker, for the record, I have circulated those committee stage amendments. Mr. Speaker, I would like to inform this Honorable House of some of the key provisions of the Public Authorities Bill. Mr. Speaker, Part 2 of this new legislation brings clarity in the definition of the purpose, direction, and objectives of a public authority. The bill also makes specific requirements for the establishment and constitution of boards that will be standard for all of our statutory authorities. And the details: board members of a public authority will be appointed by cabinet and will consist of a chairman and not less than 4 of the members who is responsible for the governance of the public authorities. Cabinet will also appoint the chairperson. Board members will serve for a term at the pleasure of the cabinet. To ensure continuity, no more than 2/3 of the board members can be replaced at any one time unless there are special circumstances. A board shall not have more than 40% of public or civil servants as board members, and the chairman shall not be a full-time civil servant or public servant. Mr. Speaker, Cabinet will also decide the level of remuneration for board members, and as is now, civil servants who serve on boards are not entitled to payment. Cabinet shall require a person it proposes to appoint as a board member to give a full disclosure of their interests to establish whether there are any conflicts of interest. Cabinet shall ensure that between them, the board members have adequate knowledge, experience of the business, corporate governance, and strategic and financial management. So we want to make sure, Mr. Speaker, that all of the board members that are in charge of our SAGCs have the requisite knowledge and experience to carry out this major role. The board must meet at least once every 3 months. An agenda and accompanying documents must be sent to the board members 5 working days in advance, unless there are special circumstances, and the chairman must call a meeting of the board if requested to do so by 3 board members. And the chief executive is a non-voting member of the board. Mr. Speaker, the bill also ensures that boards have been delegated the necessary power to act. However, at the same time, it includes provisions to ensure that ministers are kept informed of each public authority's operations, that performance is acceptable, and also to enable the minister to hold the board accountable for the performance of the organization. Mr. Speaker, Clause 14 of the bill establishes that a board shall be responsible for the performance of the public authority and establishes both general and specific responsibilities that must be met. In Clause 15, the bill also requires the development of key performance indicators of the authority's performance and that those are monitored by the board. Mr. Speaker, role clarity is an important aspect of good governance. The bill sets out clearly the responsibilities and accountabilities of cabinet, ministers, board members, chairmen of boards, chief officers, and chief executive officers. Mr. Speaker, for example, in relation to the procurement of goods and services, the bill specifies that the chief executive is responsible for purchasing, and board members cannot be involved in the choice of supplier. The role of the board is to establish the procurement policy and agree the budget for the acquisition, but not to be involved in the selection of the supplier. Mr. Speaker, role clarity is particularly important when we think of the KRP fiasco, where we had a rogue chairman inserted himself in all roles of a major procurement. It follows that once this bill is passed, it will be much more difficult to perpetrate that type and level of fraud. And Mr. Speaker, we get questions about this all the time. What has changed since the KRP fiasco? And Mr. Speaker, this is one of the key changes that the government wants to put in place to ensure that we don't have that type of fraud perpetrated on the people of this country again. Because what we had here was a CEO who was able to not only decide what they wanted, but help to procure it. And by him being able to insert himself at all the different levels, he was able to manipulate the process. So this bill seeks to address that concern. Mr. Speaker, another example of role clarity is that the legislation specifies that the board and every public authority will be responsible for, among other things, recruiting the chief executive officer, and that the chairman will head the recruitment panel. Mr. Speaker, this is in keeping with established best practice and will improve the independence of our authorities, as currently some CEOs are appointed by cabinet. It should be noted, however, that while the recruitment of a new CEO is the responsibility of the board, the law does require the chairman of the board to consult with the relevant minister before and during the process. It keeps open and transparent the process. This bill includes provisions to ensure that there's accountability for the exercise of power by chief executive officers of public authorities. The role of the CEO is also specified in the bill, and the board must delegate in writing to avoid any clarity, to avoid any confusion of issues. The CEO will be responsible for delivery of outputs and outcomes, achievement of the ownership performance, day-to-day management, including personnel and financial management functions, implementing board decisions, providing technical advice and guidance, preparation of the draft budget, ownership agreement, procurement, preparation of financial statements and presentations of annual audited statements to the board, forwarding the annual report to the ministry portfolio as soon as possible. Mr. Speaker, the role of the chief officer in the ministry has also been specified in the bill as it pertains to public authorities. There has been some confusion in the past about what role should chief officers play when it comes to their SAGCs. Mr. Speaker, the chief officer will be required under the new bill to monitor the purchase and ownership agreements for the minister for compliance, and the chief officer will ensure that financial statements and reports are presented to this honorable house in a prescribed format in a timely manner. Mr. Speaker, the chief officer will also be involved in the recruitment of the chief executive officer and will sit on the interview panel and will be consulted on the terms and conditions of remuneration. Mr. Speaker, I would now like to move on to the human resource aspects of the bill. The objectives are to bring a more consistent approach to human resource management across the public authorities and to develop best human resource practices. Mr. Speaker, doing my research in preparing for this presentation, I had a look at 9 of the laws that govern our SAGCs. 9. And I looked for one word, and I can't find it. It's the word that we have been talking about here over the last week. It's a word that is near and dear to all our hearts. It's what we've been fighting here for doing the legal practitioners bill. And the word that is not in any of these laws is the word Caymanian. So we have to ask why. And that is why we need to have this bill. Because when these laws were developed, they were developed with understanding that this legislation that we have in place now was going to be developed. So each one of these, some of these laws did not have anything to do with whether they should hire Caymanians or not. So what this bill does, Mr. Speaker, is to ensure that the SAGCs give preference to Caymanians when it comes to employment. Many of the laws, like I said, do not even require the post to be advertised. Now, Mr. Speaker, I don't want to speak bad about our SAGCs. This is not their fault. In fact, they do a good job of employing Caymanians. They are 77% of their employees are Caymanian. We have Caymanians who are the head of these organizations. Ms. Cinda Scotland, Mr. Richard Smith, Dr. Julia. We have some outstanding Caymanians who are in charge of these SAGCs, and they do a fantastic job. But this bill, Mr. Speaker, is about tomorrow. When those people are gone and they have retired, who's going to take over from them? That's why, Mr. Speaker, we need this bill, which will have that overarching responsibility to ensure that Caymanians are looked out for in our SAGCs. Key provisions, Mr. Speaker, is to ensure that that concern that I just raised is properly addressed. This means that all vacancies in the public authorities must be advertised. Also, it's very important in the provisions that it gives preference to Caymanians, And in clause 25 and 44, it specifies that in the shortlisting process and the filling of the vacancies, Caymanians must be given preference where they rank broadly at the same level as a non-Caymanian. So two people are have the same qualification and experience, Caymanian gets the job. Mr. Speaker, this legislation provides for giving preference to Caymanians. This has been going on in the civil service since 2007 and has also been in the immigration law from the 1980s. Members will note that Part 4 and 6 of the bill are very similar to requirements within the civil service under the Public Service Management Law. This includes such key provisions as a common salary scale, a requirement for jobs to be evaluated scientifically, process for fair and open recruitment, and protection for Caymanians, and adherence to the defined set of public service values and a code of conduct. Mr. Speaker, the bill applies these important provisions to public authorities. For example, it provides a remedy for the issues raised about salaries within public authorities. For example, it specifies that all public authorities shall operate under the same salary scale as determined by Cabinet, and all jobs are to be evaluated using the same evaluation methodology. Mr. Speaker, some persons have asserted that one salary scale cannot fit all SAGCs. However, I do not believe this to be true. For example, in the civil service, we have one salary scale, we have hundreds and hundreds of different job titles, all the way from a person who is caring for the elderly. We have pilots, we have scientists, we have lawyers. Any job imaginable has been being able to fit under our salary scale in the civil service, when we believe it can be done in the SAGCs. And Mr. Speaker, I've seen evidence of this. Just last week, I'm looking through the compass, and I see where the SAGCs has a number of jobs being advertised. Two very, very different SAGCs were applying for finance staff. Their duties was similar, and their pay was similar. So it shows that it can work, especially for some of their finance staff. It is right there. Person working in two different SAGCs, but their salaries were the same. But I've also seen the opposite, where a patrol officer in one of our public authorities, a salary was being offered that was higher than a salary that we were advertising in the civil service for our anti-corruption investigator. And the job qualifications were not even anywhere near being the same. So we are paying a patrol officer more in the SAGCs that we are paying for an anti-corruption investigator. Now, I make no judgment on this. Maybe our salaries are too low, but it is something that we do need to address. But it does say that it does prove that a single salary scale can work and will address these type of discrepancies. Mr. Speaker, we have had feedback in relation to this particular clause in the bill, and rightly so. Some public authorities are concerned that a single salary scale may not ensure that they are able to attract highly skilled staff, especially those who have skills that are in short supply globally. So I'll be bringing a committee stage amendment to create the necessary flexibility to address this issue while not compromising the balance and consistency the single scale will provide. Mr. Speaker, I wish to make it clear that the purpose of this bill is to bring balance and consistency to salaries within and across the entire public service. However, the bill will not, I make that very, very clear, reduce salaries for existing employees. That's not what we're about. But we want to get it right so new employees coming in will be paid correctly. Mr. Speaker, Cabinet must agree overall salary increases for public authorities, staff as a result of a cost of living adjustment, and that cost of living adjustment should be calculated by the Economics and Statistics Office. This is important, again, so that we have a consistency across our SAGCs. The bill also requires for bonuses or performance payment schemes to be defined in the authority's ownership agreement, and no member of staff of the public authority shall be paid bonuses unless the scheme is specified in the ownership agreement and again approved by Cabinet. Mr. Speaker, the bill also provides in Section 48 for Cabinet to extend civil service policies to the public authorities to ensure good governance and human resource practices. So, Mr. Speaker, policies that we have in the civil service that are working very well, like our travel policy, policy on succession planning for Caymanians, all of those things we can extend across the entire public service. They don't have to reinvent the wheel. Mr. Speaker, when developing this legislation, the government has adhered to the OECD best practice principle for regulatory policy, the Governance of Regulations, published in 2014. Mr. Speaker, in winding up, I would like to thank the project team that developed the legislation, also the Chamber of Commerce, who allowed their president to be part of the team, the Auditor General's Office for their comments, the Chief Executive Officer of the Turtle Farm and the Water Authority, who were part of the team, my chief officers and the public authorities themselves, who all gave valuable feedback and helped us draft this bill. Mr. Speaker, to conclude, public authorities are an essential part of government. The service they provide and the regulations they enforce are a major contributor to our economy. They do a good job. This is about bringing consistency and making them better. Improvements in these areas will benefit the community by enhancing the effectiveness of our public authorities and ultimately the achievement of public policy goals. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I would ask for the support of all members of this Honorable House for this very important legislation, which is long overdue. I thank you, sir.
We'll take the evening break. We'll return here at 6 p.m. Could the Honorable Premier indicate how late we're going, please, for those that may need to notify?
Until our eyes start to droop, Mr. Speaker, I can't go by mine. I am really very concerned, Mr. Speaker, about us getting through by Friday. As you and I know better than others, we have a funeral that we have to attend on Thursday afternoon, so we won't be able to go late on Thursday. And whether we want to or not, whether we want it to happen or not, the House will be dissolved next Tuesday. Next Tuesday. So we have to get through the business. So I'm going to kind of play it by ear, ask members to continue to help cooperate, and we work through as many of the bills as we can tonight. And I'm not going to be unreasonable. I'm human as everybody else is, but I'm conscious, so conscious that if we don't get it done this week, we're in trouble.
Thank you. The House will stand suspended until 6 p.m.